Welcome. This guy sees this horse galloping quickly down the road, and the rider is just very, very intent. And looks like this guy's really got somewhere important to go. And he's fascinated just to see him coming down the road and coming at him and heading by. And he yells out to this guy, "Where are you going in such a hurry?" And the guy looks at him and yells out, "I have no idea. Ask the horse." That's a classic Zen story. And I like that story because we're all on a horse. And I like to think of the horse as kind of wild, untamed energy that kind of rushes around. That wild, untamed horse is usually chasing something or running away from something. And we're kind of on for the ride. So the question is, that thing that is running toward and the thing that's running away from, what is that? It's a little bit of what I'd like to talk about. And I think that what it's running from or running toward is change. I don't know about you, but it seems like a lot of people these days are dreading change. This part of this built-in negativity bias we have towards self-preservation, we kind of anticipate the worst and we want to hang on to the familiar. And the interesting thing is, if you could shift your relationship to change, there's a chance that you might feel a lot differently about your journey. So what I'd like to talk about, what I'd like to share with you is, as usual, in 4 parts. The first part is this basic law of change and how integral it is to Buddhist thinking. Change happens. Secondly, I'd like to talk about our particular styles of resisting change. Usually we're just caught in either aversion or attraction, running away, running toward. And what I'd like to explore thirdly is what it means to say yes. Because in everything that's changing, there's a lot you have no control over. But what you do have control over is your attitude. And that can make all the difference. And fourth, I'd like to talk about what is it like to live in a world that is infused with change, like now? How do we navigate this incredibly fast-changing world, or apparently fast-changing world, with equanimity, with a certain kind of steadiness? It's a classic story, and certainly one that I've told before. But when it comes to these Dharma talks, they're all the same stories. It's pretty much, as I like to say, it's the same talk. I've led lots of meditation retreats, and I've sat a fair bit of meditation retreats, and I've experienced huge torment on meditation retreat, and I have sat with a lot of people who are pretty tormented on meditation retreats. One thing I always say, if you're interested in becoming a meditation teacher, don't do it if you really need people to like you, because they won't, at least not in the short run. So someone asks for an interview with the teacher, and he says, "I am having a horrible experience. I'm in physical pain. I can't focus. I've got all these emotions that are just running rampant. I don't think I can do it. This is really, really horrible." Teacher listens patiently and says, "Hang in there. It's going to change. Just trust me, it's going to change." As often happens on a meditation retreat, you'll meet with a teacher like every 3 or 4 days. So he was back for his next interview. And he said, "I cannot believe how transformational this has been. I feel so good. I just feel this sense of relaxed presence. I feel a sense of love and appreciation for so much. I feel so grateful. This is going great. I'm loving it." The teacher says, "Hang in there. This is going to change." It's a simple little story, but it's got everything in it. This life is infused with change. And I've always loved that mantra, which has been really, really helpful for me. The mantra is keep going. When things are really, really tough and you're feeling really beat up, keep going. And when you think you've arrived, definitely keep going. Maybe you've looked in the mirror recently. And maybe you've noticed things have changed. I certainly have. I look in the mirror now and I don't recognize myself. My hair is thinning, I'm getting more jowly, kind of the sagging face, the aging spots. And if you think about the last time you looked in the mirror and you really looked at what's changing, chances are either you've loved what you're seeing, or maybe you're feeling a little bit grief over your relationship to your physical body changing. But there's something really interesting about this sort of meditation on yourself in a mirror. Now, one thing you'll notice is everything that's changed, how much older you are. But here's the kicker. When you're looking in the mirror at yourself, can you notice what it is that's noticing? And does the noticing factor change? I love that inquiry. In fact, many years ago, I was on a meditation retreat and I kind of found myself looking in the mirror. And this was many, many years ago. I think I was in my 30s. And I had this sort of vision of looking in the mirror, seeing myself as an older guy, kind of balding and aging and smiling back at me. And I thought, in that moment, it was sort of an insight of like, maybe aging means I could be happier. Maybe aging means I can actually be more wise and more awake. And I tried to make that as an anchor. Losing my hair means I must be getting happier and wiser. At a retreat not too long ago, I was looking in the mirror and I realized I've arrived. I'm that guy. I'm that guy smiling back at myself when I was 30. The first law of reality is that everything that is the product of causes and conditions is going to change. Everything changes except for what is unborn. So what does that mean? Well, it means your body is going to change. Your beliefs, your mind and how it functions is going to change. Your character is going to change. In fact, it's not only going to change, it's destined to kind of evaporate, at least from this particular plane of existence. And we're usually thrown to a sense that change is bad. And the truth is, change is not necessarily bad. It's the label you put on it. Ram Dass tells this story of seeing this ad, and the ad said, some people call these aging spots. I call them ugly. And he wanted to create another ad that said, some call these ugly. I call them aging spots. The label we put on change depends on our sense of freedom. When I was 4, I could not wait to go to kindergarten. When I was 12, I couldn't wait to go to boarding school. When I was 15, I couldn't wait to get my driver's license. When I was 20, I couldn't wait to turn 21. Now that I'm in my 60s, I'm in no rush to get to 70. But it all comes down to attitude. So, a little Zen pop quiz for you, if you like. You can close your eyes. It's okay to have your eyes open, but if you would, you might close your eyes and take 3 slow, deep breaths. Just take a moment and sense what is changing in your life right now. And it is possible to drill down a little more. What is changing in your life that you are resisting or dreading? And what's changing in your life that you're eager for, that you're looking forward to? And can you get a sense of the change that tightens you up inside, that has a kind of inner dread? The change that enlivens you or excites you? And is it possible, just for a moment, to sense who you are as the one who is aware of change and is also aware of your reactivity to change? The teacher Ajahn Chah describes this as, can you be aware of the one who is aware? So if you like, you can open your eyes, or you can remain with them closed. Now, it's one thing to notice what's changing, but the next level of practice is to notice your relationship to the change. And this points toward kind of the second law of reality, of dukkha. It's referred to as steadiness, unsatisfactoriness, stress. And your entire state of happiness is based on your relationship to what's changing. And here, of course, you get to see your bias. You get to see the lens through which you are perceiving. And it's interesting how we are attracted to what is already established. And here's an interesting study I ran across. In one study, people who saw a painting described as being painted in 1905 found it far more pleasing than people who saw the same painting described as created in 2005. In another, they admired the appearance of a tree described as being 4,500 years old more than they did those who thought the same tree was 500 years old. Another really cool example, study participants were given a piece of European chocolate. It was described to them as having first been sold in its region either 73 years ago or 3 years ago. And guess which group rated the chocolate as better tasting? So it's not impossible to overcome this unconscious bias. But if we want to be awake and successful, we have to realize that the bias is there. If you want to change with grace, if you want to open up to innovation and creativity, we have to convince others that new can be good. And this is really challenging because the resistance to change is so strong. It's so much connected to our perception of how we think the future would be altered. I grew up in Pennsylvania in a Pennsylvania Dutch farmhouse, 150 years old, built from fieldstone. It had really thick 14-inch walls, and it had what's called a summer kitchen. In the summer, in the basement or the ground floor, that's where they would cook to avoid kind of the summer heat. And the house that I grew up in had multiple fireplaces. And when I was a kid, my dad decided to put a porch on the front. They had to knock down some of the old construction. And I remember so clearly the foreman who was building this porch saying, the whole idea of old houses being better built is nonsense. He said modern construction is so much better. And we found out that one of the fireplaces was just held in place with what's called chicken wire, just old fencing, just sort of like suspended there. So old is not necessarily better. But we tend to resist change for a couple of reasons. One is we fear the unknown. That's really big. Or there's some sense of mistrust. We're not trusting the intent or the energy around the change. Or third, we fear a loss of control. So all this is going on in the brain, of course, and the basal ganglia, which is sort of the primitive brain or the ancestral brain, is responsible for wiring our habits. There's this cluster of nerve cells is all tied into our automatic or our routine behaviors. And we're familiar with those and they make us feel good. And yet we have to respond to change. So there's lots of change in our culture right now. My God. And guess what? There's more coming. And the greatest impact of change, of course, is climate change, societal upheaval, realizing this built-in bias toward race. All of this is coming to a head right now. And a big one that's coming up is automation. There'll be massive job losses. When we have automated driving, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. The service industry is going to change dramatically. And so there's this huge amount of fear. Again, going back to fear of the unknown, mistrust, loss of control. And so our brain seeks comfort in the familiar. We want to look back, like make something great again. But there's another part of the brain that's evolving. Another part of the brain that sees new possibilities. And when you can quell or calm that primitive brain that is all about self-preservation, then something pretty magical arises. Some call it insight. Some call it simply opening to new possibilities. So it's an interesting thing. As much as you might identify as a progressive and open to new change, when you really explore how much your life is built on habits, how much your basal ganglia is organized around familiarity, it's quite interesting to see how much we cling to the familiar. And of course, this gets more and more exacerbated in our culture because now with the polarization, we can read and watch and listen to only the people we agree with. And in this polarization, we have to find a way to respond positively to change. And it's not just a general sense of well-being, it's our survival right now. Darwin famously said that it's not the fastest or the strongest that survive. It's the ones that are the quickest to adapt to change. So the question becomes, how can you enhance your capacity to respond to change, to not get locked into fear, to not get locked into calcifying around the way that you want it to be? It's all about perspective. It's all about the stories that we tell ourselves and how we can cultivate these shifts. So about 20 years ago, I had just completed I think it was 24 years of my affiliation with the Kripalu Center and the Kripalu Yoga tradition. I kind of stumbled in, made myself at home, and stayed. And for a few years, toward the end, I was president of Kripalu. We were doing a massive reorg after moving from being kind of a traditional ashram to more of an ecumenical sectarian program center. And I'd really given myself to try to make that change happen. I really believed in the work and wanted to see it continued. So for a couple of years, I was kind of the head honcho. And I worked hard, I tried hard. I realized I'm I wasn't a match for the job and how it had evolved. I've been there for a long time and given myself really fully to being there. I was a junior varsity monk for many, many years. I'd given myself fully. And when I realized it was up, that it was time to go, of course, I was committed to doing it smoothly, and I worked out a deal with the board to transition as gracefully as possible and support the passing of the baton to the next person. But I realized that after most of my life at that time, being identified with who I was, living in the ashram and all that stuff, that when you're at the top of an organization, there's nowhere to go but leave. I'm a naturally anxious person. So as you can imagine, there was lots of rumination, playing in all kinds of different scenarios, basically trying to figure out what's next in my life. And that tension, that kind of angst or that clench really began to build as the time got closer. I upped my meditation practice to try to stay present to the kind of the turmoil of this pending change. And then in a meditation, this little insight popped up. It was a question. And the question went like this. The question was, what if, when I look back on this event in 2 years, I'll say that this was the best possible thing that could have happened? That question, what if this was the best thing that could have happened, shifted my state in a powerful way? What if this was the beginning of a new adventure? What if I'm moving into a time of unexpected opportunity? It began to really enliven me and shift me from a sense of dread to a sense of feeling pretty good about it, even though I had no idea where I was going to go. And I had some pretty wild scenarios planned out as possibilities. You know, there's a difference between magical thinking, that is to say, I'll just think happy thoughts and everything will be good, and what we can call reframing. And this was really kind of a question that helped me to kind of reframe my whole experience from like, oh my God, what am I going to do, to what if this is an unprecedented time of new opportunity? And what I noticed was that when I kind of moved out of that self-preservational negativity bias, I was more relaxed. I was actually able to kind of savor my time. And most importantly, I was a lot more intuitive around what was coming next. So this sense of reframing can be a really powerful practice, because we tend to look through this very small frame, and then when you open the frame and you pay attention, those inquiries can be really, really juicy. So if you like, a little Zen pop quiz. Once again, if you like, you can close your eyes. And if you would, take 3 slow breaths. And if you would, bring into mind something that's going on right now that's difficult for you. Either something that isn't changing that you want to, or something that isn't changing. It can be a small little thing, or maybe something with a little more of a grip. And if you would, take a few moments to bring it a little bit closer. When you think about this, what does it feel like inside? What is it like to feel this as a problem? And then if you would, ask yourself the following question. What if in 2 years, you were to look back at this and realize this is the best possible thing that could happen. Or another question that I find maybe even more helpful. What's great about this situation? Or what could be great about this? So if you like, you might deepen your breath. Of course, sometimes your resistance to change, either wanting something to change or not wanting to something change, can have really, really deep roots. And it really requires some really, really deep investigation. But it can be helpful. And I love that question of what's great about this, or what could be great about this, as a way of shifting the frame. Because sometimes what we think is bad news turns out to be good news. Someone I know was nearing retirement, and he got pushed out of his full-time job into a part-time job. Catastrophe. Very, very dramatic reaction. But he decided to stay with it. And what he realized was he loved working part-time. And he realized that he wanted to keep working part-time beyond his projected retirement, because that shift in the ratio between life and work was magical for him. Someone else I know found a relationship came to an end, very, very much against her wishes. Incredibly painful. But she stayed with it. She kept going. And only later did she realize that she really wasn't a match in this relationship. It was doomed. And if she had stayed in it, it would have been just a perpetual struggle. There's all kinds of stories when you look at history. The attack on Pearl Harbor that really ushered us formally into World War II was awful bloodshed. But there were those in Congress and in Europe who saw this as a way of breaking the deadlock in our culture so that we could commit. Some argue that this latest round of political turmoil is possibly a wake-up call in our culture. People are realizing that being complacent and sitting back is not a strategy, and there's the possibility of this ushering in a whole new political force. And the interesting thing about change is it doesn't necessarily care about your opinion. It's just happening. And the more that we can loosen our grip on reactivity, the more we have the capacity to respond. The more capacity we have to be creative, to be innovative. One of my favorite lines, and I don't know the poet who said this, maybe like the greatest reframe, is this line from this poet who said, "Sometimes it's helpful to take the 3,000-year view." When I can remember that, it really opens up the space. It doesn't mean that I disassociate, maybe a little bit. But quite often it helps me to respond in a way that's more fully embodied. So right now, I'm here on Cape Cod. And one of the things that Tara and I love is long distance swimming. And I've had some opportunities to explore resistance, because on the bay side of the Cape, quite often the current will flow kind of around the whole bay, and the water warms up in the shallower water. And the water's exquisite. It's really, really quite nice. And it kind of flows in, warms up through the bay, and then cycles out back to the Atlantic. But last week, everything reversed. The current shifted. I mean, it actually reversed. Instead of warm water, we had freezing cold Atlantic water coming into the bay. Not only that, the wind picked up, made for really frothy water, lots of white caps, really, really choppy, and the temperature dropped into the 60s. We're pretty committed to swimming. And I realized that with the colder weather and colder water, I had used my wetsuit. And I had left my wetsuit in the rain, just sitting out there in the rain. Have you ever put on a cold wetsuit? It's not fun. So I was filled with complaints. And I noticed that my complaining didn't change anything. I had zero control over the weather. But I did have control over my attitude. So I went for a swim in cold, freezing cold, choppy water. And what I did was I focused on reframing. So what I told myself was, I'm going to be so glad I did this. The second thing I said to myself was, I'm going to really develop some new skills. Learning how to swim long distance in really, really choppy water. My number one strategy is to call it an adventure. And I realized if I call something an adventure, somehow that's okay. And so I swam, and it was a really hard, challenging swim, and it was a great adventure. I had a tremendous sense of accomplishment, a sense of developing some skill. And I was glad I did it. And I had to go through the same process the next day, of course. So learning how to be aware of your attitude when it comes to change and learning how to shift or reframe your attitude is huge. So another little Zen pop quiz, if you will. If you like, you can close your eyes. And you might bring into mind, again, something where you feel some resistance, something that's changing. And either it's changing and you don't want it to, or it isn't changing and you do want it to. And just take the next 3 breaths, if you would, to kind of bring into mind a little issue you'd like to spend a couple minutes with. And if you have that in mind, if you would, take some time to explore how, as you think about this, what it feels like on the inside. How does this issue kind of live on the inside? Is there a predominant feeling or sensation that you can identify? Maybe there is an emotion that you can identify as well. And now, if you would, we're going to explore a 2-part meditation. The first meditation is to sense, what is it like to say no to this? Just a flat out no. And for the next few rounds of breath, notice what feeling or feeling tone forms as you say no. And now, if you would, explore what it's like to say yes. To say yes to the change. What do you feel and what do you notice? If you like, you might deepen your breath. If you like, you might open your eyes. Not required. In this classic meditation, kind of the yes-no meditation, is many people report that when you say no, there's a closing down, there's a shutting down. And when you say yes, there's kind of a softening, an opening. Not in all cases. Sometimes no feels really, really good. But the important thing here is to notice that, number one, life is about change. It's a flow of change. And then noticing your reaction. Being able to notice and name your reaction to what's changing is incredibly powerful. And then the sense, even beyond that, who is it that is aware of your reaction to change? What is beyond that? This points toward a really important element of practice. Some people refer to this as witness consciousness, or taking the seat of the witness, taking the seat of the observer. The sense of the witness or the observer is about accessing preferenceless awareness. It's neither for nor against anything. It's this kind of unblinking eye of mindful awareness. When you can tap into that, it will reveal your biases. It will reveal your preferences. It will reveal who you are as this reactivity machine. But it also can point toward a sense of possibility. You can think of this as what it isn't. Think of it as this awareness which is non-judging, non-grasping, non-clinging, non-conceptual, non-harming, and non-manipulative. Your experience of life comes through these lenses: change, your relationship to change, and your true essential nature. When you can access the sense of the witness, it can begin to open up really cool stuff. Number one, it can open up intuition. It can open up compassion. It can open up all kinds of new possibilities. The more that you see and recognize what a desire machine you are, how you're driven by wanting and pushing away, the more you can begin to sense this quality of preferenceless awareness. And this realm of preferenceless awareness is kind of a doorway. It's a doorway to insight. It's a doorway into what you might call choiceless choice. And what does that mean? I know I've just a couple minutes left, but I'd like to talk just a little bit about this whole idea of choiceless choice. First of all, it's been said that enlightenment is simply to be without desire. I love that definition, because think of it right now. Who are you right now without desire? It might give you a little glimpse into the sense of pure preferenceless awareness. And when you begin to explore this sense of possibility, infinite possibility, you can begin to kind of get this sense of what we could call your dharma or your path. One way to think of it is, one of my favorite definitions of your path is what you can't not do. Sometimes it's a rare thing to touch into that, but when you look at your options, the more you can cultivate this sense of witness, this sense of preferenceless awareness, the more you can sort of sift down beneath your biases, beneath your preferences, and get to that place of, you know what, I have lots of choices here, but in my heart of hearts, I really don't have a choice. This is where I'm called. That's what's possible. It's not easy. It's not easy. It requires this calming. This calming of the mind, this calming of the heart, and why so much of the meditative practices are about calming. the shamatha practices of using concentration and relaxation to arrive at settling and settling and settling this turbulent, muddy water of the mind. Over time, the sediment begins to settle and you start to see more clearly. So when you find yourself confronted with something that's changing and you don't want it to, or something that isn't changing and you want it to, it can be tremendously powerful to slow down and to pause, to explore what it means to take this seat of the witness, to explore intimately and to investigate what's changing, and then to explore your relationship to what's changing. Quite often, when you track back your reactions, you can sense how old those biases are. You may begin to sense how much your reactivity is based on fear of losing control or a lack of trust. And if you can bring a sense of mindful awareness, of non-judging awareness to that, and if you can bring a sense of empathy or compassion to that, you may be able to tap into what Darwin talked about. It's not about the smartest or the strongest who survive. It's about the ones who are the quickest to adapt to change. And to adapt to change means that you have to see into those biases, to make room for your reactivity, to know it, to get familiar with it, and to ask yourself, what do you really, really want? There's a phrase in Icelandic. I'm not familiar with it. I'm familiar with the phrase. I'm just not familiar with how to say it in Icelandic. But because there's only one real port in Iceland and Reykjavik, a lot of the fishermen would have to go out directly into the waves. And what this phrase refers to is you have to wait for the right wave. And it's that patience of waiting, that sense of inner listening to, that sense of choiceless choice. That is part of the mystery of the practice. The more you relax, the more you calm, the more clearly you will see. And ultimately, perhaps, the more you will find yourself guided not by fear, not led by the biased mind, but led by wisdom and led by compassion. So whatever is changing in your life, may you meet it with ease, may you meet it with equanimity, and may you be guided by that wise heart. I hope this was helpful. It's great to be with you. Best wishes, and I look forward to being with you again.